walk with God. Because if at any point I walked away from that, I quit getting in my word every day, I could very easily fall back into those temptations of the bitterness and the pornography. Because I'm not strong enough of my own to live the type of life that God's called me to. So we got married and God started changing things in our life. We started going back to church faithfully, and little by little, our lives got changed. I went from where I would not be a pastor in Maine if it was the last job on earth to fine, I'm going to be a pastor in Maine, but I'm going to go tell those people what I think of them, to where my heart is completely broken for that area and all the people up there that if they died right now, it's 4% Christian, the area that we are. Maine as a whole is 3% Christian. The area we are is a little bit higher. So that means 96% of the people right now, if they died, they would not go to heaven. And that just breaks my heart. And in 2018, we knew I would be retiring from the military this year, and we wanted to go somewhere that had military support facilities so I could take advantage of those and the VA benefits. So we were looking in Kittery, Maine and Bangor, Maine, somewhere within 45 minutes of those areas. And as we're driving up there trying to figure out where to go, we stopped by our district office. The Assemblies of God district office is in Portland, Maine, and we stopped there. And we talked to Superintendent Marquardt, and we're telling him about our dreams, and he's telling us, that's really great. If you were retired right now, I have 5 open churches that need a pastor I can put you in. But what I'm really praying for is church planners. And Cindy and I looked at each other and we laughed, because that's for crazy people. There's a lot of unknowns, and we are very big planners. And so is God. He just doesn't tell us his plans all the time, and that's kind of annoying. But so we're like, no, that's not something we're going to do. And we just laughed. Well, we ended up going up to Bangor, and we were driving around there, checking out the towns around there. We went to a sandwich shop in Bangor called Legacy Sandwich, and I'll let Cindy pick up here.
Yeah, so we went in and they were playing Christian music, and I started a conversation because I talk with everybody, and I started talking with the guy, and he said he was sharing how he had been praying for a younger couple. And so for us, this is really weird, because in the military, we're old. We're irrelevant. But then in this world, we're like young, and we're like, this is awesome, we're young again. So we appreciate it. So he said, we've been praying for younger couples, but if you want to go to a church that's doing something, go to the church in the mall. And it was a church plant. And so it's amazing when you take God, and he's not just the savior of your life anymore, but he's the Lord of your life. That's such a switch, right? Where you can say, okay, God, this is what I planned, but this is what I'm going to let you dictate what's going on in my life. So we ended up at the church in the mall, and we walk in, and it's filled with people, and we both have at that moment an experience. He went to the bathroom, and I stayed in my seat, and I'm just watching people praise and worship. And like people that, when you grow up in the church, there's a church looking person. Remember, I was the one that everyone was like, I want my kid to look like you. So when I looked in the mirror, it was like, oh, this is what a Christian looks like. And I saw these people that they didn't look like what I had grown up seeing, right? But they're like praising with everything within them, and you can tell God is changing their lives. And in that moment, God said, this is what I want you guys to do. And I was like, okay, but God and I have a deal that if he wants to change something in our life, he can tell me, but he has to tell him as well. So I'll plant a little like, do you think God is? But I was like, if you want that big of a change in our life, you're going to have to tell him.
And so God can talk to us anywhere. God's favorite place to talk to me is the bathroom or the area around the bathroom. So I'm waiting to use the bathroom, and there is a guy there who did not look like a church person. He had shaved head, tattoos all over his face and his neck, needle marks on his arm, about 3 teeth in his mouth. And but he was in there where he was at, going after God, and God was changing his life. Because you're never too far gone for Jesus to change you.
Amen.
And while I was waiting to use the bathroom, he goes, do you need to use the bathroom too? Because I can let you go in front of me, but you gotta do number 1 or number 2. Except those are not the words he used. He used not church words. And I was like, that's when God told me, this is what I want you to do. There are people out there who, they don't belong in the church, and that's who I've called you to reach. And so God talked to us both at the same time in different places. And then later that week, we were in Brewer, Maine, and I'm a huge history fan. There's a guy there, Joshua Chamberlain, during the Civil War. He won the Medal of Honor, and he grew up in Brewer, and they have a park for him there. I was in there looking around the city, and we just felt God say, this is your city. And as we started praying, what does this look like? What do you want us to do? The name Illuminate Church came to us, and that speaks to the past of New England. If you know New England's history, it was founded by people coming here to worship God how they wanted. And there's a famous sermon preached by one of them, by John Winthrop, called The City on a Hill, where they wanted to let their light shine in the hope before all men and all the world that they could see, hey, this is who we're serving and this is how we're living our lives. And so we picked Illuminate Church because it speaks back to that history, and it's also from the Bible, Matthew 5:14 to 16. But it also speaks to the future. That is a very dark area spiritually, and we want to let our light shine for Jesus. And if you guys want to follow more about us, that is our website right there. We also have a Facebook page. Facebook is where we update the most because Facebook's really user-friendly. You can update it quickly. But all of that is linked on our website right there. If you guys, as you're one of our partners, if you did not know that, you are partnering with us financially to help us get this church going. And we appreciate that so much. That's why we're here today, to look at you guys and say thank you for what you're doing. There's going to be people that we all meet in eternity someday who are there because you guys helped us get going and you helped us share Jesus with them. And we all have a story to share. And some of us, our story is we followed Jesus from diapers to deathbed. And that is an amazing story. My mom's mother, that was her story. Some of us, we don't find Jesus until our deathbed. And that is my dad's father's story. My grandpa, we prayed for him and from the time I was little. My dad was the first one in our family to get saved, ended up becoming a pastor, and every day before we would go to bed, we would pray, Dear Jesus, let Grandma and Grandpa come to know you. And eventually my grandma did, while my grandpa was still very hostile to hearing about Jesus. Well, he ended up with Alzheimer's, and he got it pretty bad, and my grandma had to put him into a home because he was getting kind of dangerous. And she started going to church, and that's how she got saved. She was lonely, and she started going to church while my grandpa was in the home. Well, she felt one day that she tried numerous times to share her faith with him, and he'd just get angry and tell her to leave. Well, one day after a church service, she felt God tell her, I want you to go there, and I want you to talk to him. And he was having one of his moments where he was lucid, somewhat, but then he ended up getting angry and confused and sent her away, and she felt really frustrated. God, why did you send me there? What is going on? She felt like she wasted her time. And the next day, she went to go see him again, and she could tell that there was just something different about him. And he had a moment of clarity where she asked him, Richard, did you talk to Jesus? Have you been talking to Jesus? And he said, yes. And she could just tell something was very different about him. And he passed away just a couple months later after that. And so you might have people in your life who it looks like there's no hope for them, and there always is. Jesus does not stop pursuing us right up until the very end. His love for us is beyond comprehension.
Amen.
And we have a fancy name in church for sharing our stories and what God's done us. We call it testimony. But really all testimony is a story. It's a story about your life, the things you've been through, the struggles you had, your up and downs, and how the difference is, what did God do to get you through them? And so we all have a testimony or a short story to share. And the Bible tells us in 1 Peter 3:15, in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. As Christians, we're called to have an answer to tell people, this is why I'm following Jesus. And your life is a living answer, a living testimony of why you follow Jesus and what he's done. Don't be afraid to share that. The good parts, the ugly parts. And I'm going to share you some of the parts in our life now. There's times when we go through things, and we might not ever know why we went through that bad thing. But God gives us enough of the reasons why we go through things that it gives me faith, and I hope it gives you faith for the reasons, the times when we don't know the reason behind it. And I'm going to share with you some of the reasons, or the whys in our life where we've seen how it came to make sense. And the first one I'm going to talk about is on our honeymoon. When Cindy and we went to Rangeley, Maine on our honeymoon, and we decided we were going to get a kayak. Cindy's a city girl, so this is her first time in a kayak. I grew up kayaking and canoeing, and she said I was being a smart aleck. I don't That doesn't sound like me, so I think she's making it up. But she went to go turn around and say something to me, and it flipped our kayak over. I couldn't roll it over. We're in the middle of the water. It's about 60 degrees outside. We're in the middle of the lake, and it's freezing. No one is around. We're yelling for help. No one can hear us. Took us about 45 minutes to get to shore. And we had a lot of bickering in the meantime as we're freezing and yelling for help. We didn't have the life jackets on because we were young and wicked smart, so we had to put those on before we got to shore. Then when we got to shore, she was cold and wanted to sit down, so I yelled at her and said, no, you need to keep moving, you're going to die. So it was like 2 miles to get back to town, and she goes, why are you yelling at me? It's our honeymoon, this is supposed to be romantic, you're just yelling at me. But, and that's funny now, but at the same time, we could have very easily died there in that lake. And it was freezing, our limbs were starting to lock up, but God saved our lives that day. And the Bible tells us, and in Isaiah, when you pass through the waters, and I know this isn't necessarily talking about the water, but it does apply. We all go through waters in life. And it says, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. And whether it is a real river, or it is a river of trouble, God is with us through all those times. And I don't know why sometimes the rivers, it says they're not going to overwhelm us. Sometimes we can look at things with our spiritual eyes. If we'd have died there in the lake that day, that would not have meant that God wasn't in control. He just would have had a different story. But our story, which I'm grateful for, is that we did not die at that moment, and God took us through that. But God always has a story and a plan. And another thing that God has done is He has always allowed us to be financially secure so that we can bless others. And that has looked different at different stages of our life. Sometimes, if you know the story of the Bible where the widow, she came and she gave her 2 pennies, and there was all these preachers, the Pharisees, they were going and dropping in buckets of money and just giant bags of coins, and they looked like they were giving more, but Jesus said, that lady who put in the 2 pennies is giving the most, because that's all she had and she gave it to Jesus. And so whether in Cindy and I's life, we've been into times where we're giving Him our 2 pennies, or we're giving Him out of our abundance, God is always taking care of us to where we are able to give. And when it comes to giving, I challenge you, if you don't tithe, this is the one area in the Bible where God, and a tithe is 10%. And you might look at it and say, that doesn't make sense. I can afford to live on what I have. This is the one area in the Bible where God says, test me. And if He's lying about this, then that means He's lying about the rest of the Bible. And so I can honestly tell you from our lives, you cannot outgive God. It might not always be He gives you money. It might be relationships He fixes, but you cannot outgive God. I promise you that. And I'm not going to say that we gave God $1, He gave us $100, because we went through times where we've not had extra money, and we went through times where we have. But God always takes care of us as we are faithful to Him.
That's right.
And we find in 2 Corinthians, Paul writes, for if the readiness is there, it is acceptable according to what a person has, not according to what he does not have. For I do not mean that others should be eased a new burden, but that as a matter of fairness, your abundance at the present time should supply their need, so that their abundance may supply your need, that there may be fairness. As it is written, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. And one of the ways, I'm going to share a couple of ways that God has taken care of us over the years. Because for me, I'm a huge budgeter, and there have been times in my life when God asks us to give. And for me and Cindy, tithing is usually not a hard thing, because we've done that our whole lives growing up in the church. But God has challenged us sometimes to do more. And I'm the person who, when that happens, maybe you are all perfect in this area, but I get kind of hostile with God. I'm like, well, God, if I didn't do this, I could buy this for my kid, or we could do this thing, or we can even afford this right now. Why are you asking me to do that? And one of those times in our lives was when we left Texas. We had a house there that we ended up losing $40,000 in, and we didn't have $40,000 to lose when we got rid of it, because the housing market crashed when we went to go get rid of it. We ended up keeping it for 6 years that we weren't living in it because it couldn't sell. It sat empty a lot of times. We had renters who would vandalize it or steal things from it, and it was a very ugly process. And at one point during that, we felt God tell us, we had a lady in our church. She was like the grandma of the church. She was always nurturing, taking care of people. She'd give me the shirt off her back. And her granddaughter was getting married, and she had always promised her granddaughter that she would go wedding dress shopping with her. She could not afford to go out there at that time. And so we felt God tell us, I want you to buy an airplane ticket to go see her granddaughter so that she can go wedding dress shopping with her. And we're like, and that was our mortgage payment that month. And if I paid that, we weren't going to pay her mortgage. And I got really angry. I'm like, God, how can you ask me to do this? I've always paid her bills. If I do this, then we're not going to be able to pay our mortgage. Well, I did it. And I know God loves a cheerful giver. I was not a cheerful giver that time. I was obedient. And within, I think it was 2 days later, I went out to go get the mail. And Cindy had a great aunt I never met. She only met a couple times, who had put savings bonds aside for her when she was little. And she put some aside for our kids. And we had $11,000 in the mail that day. Wow. And God knew that before he asked us to give. I didn't. And now I don't know if I hadn't given, if the check would have got lost. I don't know. But all I know is if God tells you something, we're like a page. We're like a letter on a page, and God is like the page. All we see is our current letter of where we are at on the page, and God sees all the letters and the whole thing, the whole book, as how it's going to be written. So if God tells you to do something, he's going to take care of you. And then another one that means a lot to me is, it was around Christmas time. Again, we were having trouble up with our house in Texas. It was sitting empty. We were doing some repairs at that time that one of the renters had damaged. And Grace really wanted, we're going to bed one night and I'm praying with her, and she tells me what she really wanted for Christmas was a Disney Barbie princess castle. And it was like $200. And I'm like, hey Grace, I don't want to tell her no, so I tell her, well, maybe this year for Christmas, instead of getting a big present, you just get lots of little things. And she goes, that's okay, Dad, I'll just pray and ask God for it. And so I go to bed that night and I'm like, how do I tell my little girl that Jesus isn't like a Pez dispenser? And like, not only am I failing my daughter, now I'm failing Jesus because she's going to pray and ask for this thing and she's not going to get it. And so the following morning, I woke up and I had been looking at that and worrying before I went to bed. I had it open on my computer, that castle, and it was 70% off the next morning when I woke up. And so that personally for me is one of the most touching stories. And it wasn't $11,000 in the mail, but that meant more to me because God was taking care of my kids as we honored him. That's nice. And I remember the night before I went to bed, I was thinking, if I just didn't tithe, I could give my kids the Christmas they want. But again, God comes through because it's not about us and how good we are. It's about God and how good he is. And that's why I'm sharing these stories. It's not to say, oh, look at me and Cindy, we're awesome, because we are not. We do a pretty bad job sometimes. But it's to let you know God is always faithful. And you guys also have stories. No matter how much you think you look bad at those stories, God is always good. And don't be afraid to share your stories with people, because someone you know might be struggling with that very issue that you've been through, and you can encourage them. Psalms 91, 11 and 12 tells us, for he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. On their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. And I can tell you in our life, there have been not just that time in the lake, but there have been multiple times where we should have been dead. We were driving down from Utah to Texas one time, going through Colorado, and Cindy hit a patch of ice right above Denver. I woke up and our car is doing circles. It's rush hour traffic just north of Denver. Crazy traffic. I don't know how we went from the farthest left lane to the off the road 50 feet on the right. The only thing that happened was our tire got popped off. So we got pulled out of the ditch, put our tire back on, and we were good to go. And I don't know how we made it there without dying. We had an entire herd of deer, like not a deer, a herd of deer, run into our car while we were going through Illinois. Broke through the window, I got glass in my eyes, and we made it off to the side of the road without me being able to see at that time. We've almost hit 5 different moose in our life, and I know you guys have moose here, so they're pretty intimidating when you're about that close to them. And we had one that was running towards us, and right before it went in front of our car, it slipped. We were in North Dakota, and it slipped on the ice. Cindy could have rolled out her window and touched it, and so God's kept us safe from that. So God doesn't just take care of us, he protects us.
That's right.
In Genesis, we see Isaac. Isaac and Rebekah could not have kids. Now Isaac also knew God could give people kids that were told they couldn't have kids because that's how Isaac came into being. If you don't know the story of Isaac, his dad was like 100 years old and his mom was 90, well beyond the age that you have kids. I don't know how they had the energy to have a kid at that age either. And they had him. And so when Isaac and his wife are struggling with having children, Isaac could look at himself. We tell her, and this is what we tell our kids all the time, look in the mirror and you will see a miracle. And that applies to all of us, but as I'll tell you with our kids, that applies to them in a different way. So it says, and Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. So we were told, Cindy and I, at one point, we would never have kids. And that was really frustrating because I came into marriage wanting 5 kids. Cindy was the reason why we couldn't have kids. And so she felt really bad about that. That really hurt her self-esteem at times. And even though I still loved her, that caused stress, that caused doubt, that caused anger. It was a lot of times we're like, why God? Why did you put this burden in our heart? And it's not going to happen. And we have people all the time tell us, well, just adopt. And I'm not saying that adoption is bad. Adoption is a great thing. There are thousands and thousands of children out there who need a home and someone to love them. We know friends who that's how God has given them their kids. But that's not what was in our hearts. And so when we went to Texas, the pastor there, the same one who was in PK, said he'd never become a pastor. He was the first one, him and his wife, who came alongside of us and said, we're going to believe with you that you're going to have kids of your own. And if that's not what God wants for you, then it's his job to change what you feel in your hearts, not ours. We're going to pray with you with what you're feeling in your hearts right now. And God gave us Grace and Samuel. And that's why we gave them the names they have, because Grace means gift of God. And if you read in the Bible the story of Samuel, the name Samuel is asked of God because his mother was told couldn't have kids. And she prayed and God gave her Samuel and then other children. And so we tell our kids all the time, you look in the mirror and you are a living testimony. If you ever doubt is God real, just go find a mirror and look at it. But our story didn't end there. Just like with Isaac, he knew that God could answer prayers because he himself was an answer to prayer. We have had multiple people in our life that we've been able to come alongside and pray for and encourage them as they're struggling with this. We've had friends who, they have their own kids. Sometimes God tells them, no, I'm going to give you a kid through foster care or through adoption. And then there's also a program called Snowflake Babies. If you guys don't know what that is, that's where embryos that were created for in vitro, but they didn't use them, they're leftovers. Sometimes they just discard them, and sometimes you can pay to keep them frozen or kept. And then other families can adopt those embryos and plant them in the mother, and that can be their kid, that they can have a child of their own that way. We have friends who have done that as well. So good. And again, we always pray with them. What does God put in your heart? If it's to have your own kid, we'll pray for you. And if God wants to change your mind, that's his job to change your mind. And on our team that we have, the first 2 couples that we got for Illuminate Church that are part of our church are both young couples who are struggling with fertility issues. And just since we've known them, the one has become pregnant. And we know that they were put in our lives, or we were put in their lives for a reason, because we can say, I know how you're feeling because I was there, and let me tell you what God did for us. Matthew 6, 25 through 30 tells us, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life. And this is the verse I hope to master someday. I'm always the one who's worrying about how am I going to take care of my family? What are we going to do? But Jesus says, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? And why are you anxious about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is today is alive, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? And God has always provided for our family in miraculous ways. And the one I want to talk about today is our home. We've had different ways where He's miraculously provided for our homes throughout the years as we travel in the military when we're told there's no homes available. But our more recent home in Maine, it is our dream home that, or more I should say Cindy's dream home. She tells everyone, or even her kids say, this is Mom's house. So apparently I just live there and it's her house. But it is her dream home that she has always wanted. And the housing market in Maine, because I don't know if it's the same here in Vermont, you have a lot of people from Massachusetts and New York coming up there and teleworking now, and it's driving up all the prices. Nobody is paying asking price for a home because everything's so expensive. They're paying above what's being asked for. We bought our house, we paid less than asking price, and they covered all of our closing costs for our house. And the story does not just end there. We actually bought our house last fall. We didn't move into it until May. And we bought it then because we used a VA loan, and if you guys know how VA loan works, you cannot buy them during the time when you separate that short window, because otherwise you're like, hey, you're wanting to buy a home, but I see you just quit your job. And so we bought it before that time period, and we're like, because we really wanted a place to live, we wanted to be done moving. And we felt God tell us there was a couple that we knew that was struggling to find their own home because of how the housing market was. They kept having to leave their rental homes every 6 months. And we felt God tell us, I want you to let them live in your home, and they'll take care of it for you, and let them stay there rent-free. And I was like, I don't have the money to let someone live in our house rent-free and pay rent and then a mortgage there. But over the years, as our faith has increased, we've learned to say, okay, if that's what you're telling us to do, we're going to do it. And right before we moved up to Maine, I just felt like God telling us, I want you to add up, there were crazy ways that we had saved money, from like $50 here to $1,000 there, different ways that we've been blessed. And I felt God tell me, I want you to add them all up. And I added all those different dollar amounts up, and it was within $20 of the amount that our mortgage payments were for those 6 months that they were in our house. And out in the parking lot right now, we have a car. Before we left North Dakota, we had a car that had less than 100,000 miles on it. It was paid off. Nothing wrong with it. We felt God tell us, I want you to give it away. And so we gave it away to a family that needed it. And now we have one car. And I can't tell you how many times over the last few months I've been driving, like, if something goes wrong with this car, or Cindy's in an accident, I'm stuck at home with no car, how do I get to her and help her? And we bought that car last week. And without mentioning that to anybody, our situation, we had enough money given to us that covers our car payments for this year. And so you cannot outgive God. God takes care of you and meets all your needs, no matter what it is. A home, car, He will meet your needs. Some of you, God meets your needs with a Rolls Royce. Some of you, He meets it with a Honda Fit. That's what we have. But whatever God gives you, it's not yours, it's His. Amen. And we're grateful for how He's blessed us. Proverbs 21:30 tells us, no wisdom, no understanding, no counsel can avail against the Lord. And in 2014, so I grew up, all the pastors I knew were bivocational. They worked 70, 80 hours a week between church work and their other job that actually helped them to live their lives financially. And that my dad was one of them. He was burnt out and tired all the time. So to me, being a pastor meant you're working crazy hours and you're never around your family. So that was one of the reasons I told God I would never be a pastor. Well, my military retirement, if God had not killed me from my rash that I used to get, I would not have been able to join the military. And if I had, and I joined the Air Force thinking I was running away from the call of God in my life. Because of my military retirement and my VA benefits, we are going to be able to plant our church and be pastors and live off the stipend that they give us for being a pastor, that conjunction with our military benefits. So I thought I was running away from the call of God in my life when I joined the military. And actually looking back now, I can see God was just using that to enable me to be the pastor in a way where He knew I wouldn't get burnt out and frustrated. And that's just how much God loves us. We're running away from what He wants us to do, and He's still doing work in the background. And in 2014, and actually my friend Tyler here, he lives here. We're not just here visiting you guys, we're visiting him and his family as well. I've known him since 2013, 2012, somewhere around there, a long time. He was one of my troops back in the day when I was in the Air Force, when we were building bombs together. And in 2014, the Air Force was downsizing a lot. In my career field, in the rank that I was at, they were getting rid of 48% of them. And we had some really toxic supervision at our squadron. My boss would drink and drive to the point of where he'd pee himself and go out to his truck. We had a bar at our squadron. Military, that's a big thing in their culture. And I would tell him, if you do that again, I'm going to call security forces, the police for the military, because my kids, I don't want you driving like that around my kids. And I'm a direct person, so I told him that himself. And so he started, because he didn't like me, trying to find ways to make me go away. And he'd tell me to do things that were illegal, I wouldn't do them, and then he'd read me my rights for disobeying orders, one thing after another. And eventually he told us to go do a job, and then he sent the safety people out there to see how we were doing the job. And I said, oh, we're doing it this way. Well, who told you guys to do it that way? Oh, my boss. No, he didn't. In fact, he's the one who sent us out here to see how you got this job done. And so I could see right then how it was going. And this is where I did make a mistake. Instead of just saying nothing, I didn't want my airmen who were working to get in trouble. And so I told them, well, that's not what we did then. And so I got in trouble instead of my troops. And because of that, I was now on the naughty boy list, and that put me on the list of people who were going to get discharged. They had more people that needed to get kicked out than wanted to, so since I was bad, I was on the list to get discharged. And not only that, they deployed me so that Cindy would have to pack up our entire house all by herself. I would have to sell all of my leave, so I would literally come back from my deployment, move, have no vacation time saved up to help me find a job, and that was what I was faced with. And also, I had just, around that time, determined, yes, I'm going to go be a pastor when I get out. I didn't know I was going to be a church planter then, but I'm going to be able to be I'm going to be a pastor, and the military retirement, that's going to be so great when I go to do that. So I'm so angry at God. I'm like, God, I finally said I'm going to go be a pastor like you told me to, and now I'm losing my retirement. And it ended up being that I had someone on my paperwork check the box that said, please look into this. And so my paperwork went to the Pentagon, and whenever all of our my career field looked at all of my records, I ended up getting to stay in, and the 3 people who were trying to kick me out, they themselves got forced to retire. And so when God says something, no matter what it looks like, I was 100% guaranteed to get out and lose my retirement. You cannot change the plans that God has. Philippians 4:15-19 tells us, and you Philippians yourselves know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church entered into partnership with me, giving and receiving, except you only. Even in Thessalonica, you sent me help for my needs once again. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that increases to your credit. I have received full payment and more. I am well supplied, having received from Epaphroditus. And what I learned from my previous pastor was, if you don't know how to say a word in the Bible, you just say it loudly and you say it quickly, and everyone's going to think you know how to say that, unless they're biblical scholars. The gifts you sent, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. And my God will supply every need of yours according to his riches and glory. And you guys are part, just like the church in Philippia was part of Paul and his story and what he did, you guys are part of our story moving forward with Illuminate Church. As the years go on, Cindy and I have a list in our house because one of our core values for Illuminate Church is equipping families. And one of the verses that terrifies us the most in the Bible, and one of the verses for that, is Judges 2:10, where it says, after Joshua and his generation grew up, a generation came who didn't know God and what he'd done for Israel. And when you think about it, Joshua and his generation saw the walls of Jericho fall down. They saw rivers parted so that they could walk across. They saw time stand still. But yet their kids grew up not hearing about what God had done, and they walked away from him and didn't follow him. There are people in the world who are in your lives who need your stories. Your kids need your stories. And Cindy and I have in our living room, we have a picture frame where every year we go over it. And someday we're going to have to grow to 2 picture frames. It's really small font now. And it's a list of all the big things God has done in our life, and every year we go over as a family, and we add something else to it. And that's part of our stories. Whether it's our family stories or our church story, for Illuminate, we all have stories to tell. There are people that going forward, we're going to be sharing stories of what God's doing with us because of you guys. And I have one of those that I'm going to share today. And that is our trailer that we bought for all of our church supplies. We're able to buy that because people like you and other churches and individuals have partnered with us financially. So we bought a trailer that we can haul all of our church supplies with. And it was a used trailer, and because new trailers are hard to find now, the prices are up. And I went to go buy this trailer, and I was feeling kind of like, okay, I'm buying a trailer that's more money than what we originally budgeted for, and it's used because of the economy being what it is. And so I go to get it, the young kid selling it comes out, and he's wearing an olive green t-shirt, like what we wear in our military uniforms underneath. And I said, hey, are you military? And he goes, yes, I am, and his name is Nick. And we got to talking, and I bought the trailer. We ended up hanging out a couple times after that. I took him to lunch. I met with him another time, briefly. And then we invited him over with our team when we were having a training night and then a game night. We invited him over to play games with us. Got him really connected with our team. This is where the cool thing happens, is our team connected with him as well. They got his contact information. They've stayed in contact with him. And if, as long as he's not working Tuesday, so pray that he is not, Tuesday night is our next interest meeting. He's going to be coming to our interest meeting. And that is, if we didn't have people like you guys partnering with us, we would not have had the money to buy a trailer. We would not have been able to meet Nick. We would not have been able to connect with him. And so that is one way where you guys are part of our story now and helping reach our community. So don't share away from sharing your stories. There's people out there, and you are in their lives because you have a story. Your story is the key to unlocking someone's chains. And don't be afraid to share your story, whether it makes you look bad or makes you look weird. Share your story with people because people need your stories. We tell our team all the time, don't be weird. It's kind of our model, don't be weird. But just be friendly and get to know people. And there are some times when Jesus tells you to be weird, but generally, just go up to people, talk to them, show you care about them, and as you ask about them, they'll ask about you. And Jesus will give you opportunities, especially if you're praying, to share and to meet needs in their lives. That's right. Especially if you're praying about it. So today I just want to thank you all for how you partnered with us and remind you, we all have a story, and your story, or your history, is his story. That's right. And I'm going to turn this over now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's encouraging. Where's Pastor?
Hopefully it wasn't raptured.
Well, as we said, thank you for coming all the way from Maine. I know that's, for some that's like forever away, but for some of us it's not that big of a deal. But thank you for sharing that encouragement. We love being